to walk in agreement with Christ, we must do three things. We must walk in the same path. We must walk with the same motive. And we must travel at the same pace with our Christ. I'm going to say that again. If we are to walk in agreement with our Christ, we must walk in the same path as Christ. We must walk with the same motive as Christ. And we must travel at the same pace. Let me flush out real quick these three things and I'll be out your way. When we're talking about walking in the same path, we cannot walk in agreement with God if he is in one direction and we are in another. In other words, you cannot live any kind of way and do whatever your heart desires and expect the Lord to remain in communion with you. What am I saying? If God goes left and you go right, you cannot walk together. Although you may end up or arrive at the same end. You can go two different paths and get to the same point. However, each path is going to come with different trial, with different circumstances. So in other words, even though you may end up arrive at the same end, the road traveled to get there will be quite different. Give you an example. Let's take Jonah, for instance. God told Jonah to go to Nineveh. Jonah did not want to go. Jonah decided Jonah was going to go somewhere else and do his own thing. Instead of Jonah just going directly to Nineveh as God commanded and being obedient to God's command, Jonah had to go through getting tossed off a boat. Jonah had to go through just about drowning. Jonah had to go through being in the belly of a fish for 3 days. And then Jonah eventually still ended up where? In Nineveh. His path was contrary to the path that God intended him to go. He chose his own path on how to get there. What we got to understand, for one, is you got to understand, child of God, is whatever end God has purposed for you, that's going to be your end. How you get there, that's up to you. That's up to you. So if you're a child of the King, your end is heaven. Your end is to be with him in glory. But our journey along this way, it ain't got to be so stressful. It ain't got to be so hard. It ain't got to be such a struggle and so much hurt and so much pain and so much loneliness. It doesn't have to be that way. I promise. And see, I know what you're saying. I know. See, some of us think that, we're still not going to be exempt from hardship and suffering and pain. And yeah, okay, I hear you. You're right. But let me ask you this. If Daniel was disobedient and stopped worshiping the true God, would God have followed him into the lion's den? Or how about those 3 Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Well, if they had bowed to the golden image of Nebuchadnezzar, would God have gone with them into the fiery furnace? See, the thing is, it ain't whether or not God removes the suffering or remove the seasons of loss and the periods of whatever that may discontentment that may come into your life. It's about whether or not God is with you as you're going through. It's about whether or not the peace that surpasses all understanding is with you as you're going through. And I don't know about you all, but see, the thing is, if I got to endure hardship by way of duty to God, I don't have a problem going through that. If I got to endure suffering as a way of duty to God, I am confident that my God is going to be with me every step of the way. Those boys were thrown in the fire out of their duty to their king, out of their duty to the Lord. So therefore the Lord went in the fire with them. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den with the expectation of never coming out. But because he was thrown in out of his duty to God, the Lord went in there with him. Beloved, I don't know about you, but I would rather be obedient to the Lord. I would rather be obedient to the Lord and have him go with me in my periods of suffering than to leave me to myself. Obedience to God's will, God's order, God's command is the key to walking in the right paths with Christ. That's the key. His will, his order, his commands. And see, the thing is, I know that we don't like God's order. We don't like God's order. And don't get me wrong, I'm human, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I like everything that God has done, God has commanded, or God has put in place, or set in motion, or put in order. I'm not here to tell you that. But I am here to tell you, it does not matter that I do not like it. It does not matter. The thing is I love him so much. I want to honor him so much with my life, with my service, that I'm not willing to go against his order or his commands. Beloved, I ain't got a problem with you. I ain't got a problem with you. Those that live with their spouses and are not married. Me personally, as a man, I don't have a problem with that. But God has a problem with that. That's outside of God's order for the home. Beloved, I don't have a problem as a person, as a human being. I don't have a problem with those who live a homosexual lifestyle. But God has a problem with that. Why does God have a problem with that? Because God instituted marriage between a man and a woman. God instituted the act of sexual relations between a man and a woman because why? Because it was for procreation as well. It wasn't just for them to become one flesh, but it was also as a result of them becoming one flesh, it would produce children. And that cannot happen with a man and a man. That is impossible with a woman and a woman. God's order. It's God's order. It does not matter how I feel about it. Do y'all understand what I'm saying? It does not matter how, as society, how we may accept some things. That's not what is important. That's not what matters here. What matters is, what does God say? And if just because I don't like what he has to say, and I don't necessarily, and because I don't agree that I'm just going to do what I want to do, well, God will say, well, what if God just said, well, go ahead, do what you want to do. And while you're doing what you want to do, won't I just withhold blessing? Won't I just withhold mercy? Won't I just let the devil just ransack your whole house and turn your whole family upside down? Won't I just send my death angel to just come through and start slashing folk throughout your whole family? Won't I just withhold all my blessing? Since you don't care about my order, my commandment. Beloved, many of you, some of you out there don't like the fact that I won't preach a woman in my church. And I've told you all before, I believe a woman can do just about anything a man can do. And a woman in most cases can do a lot of things better than a man. I believe a woman can be a leader and be anything she wants to be in life, be the president of the United States. I do not have a problem with that as a man. But beloved, there is an order. And you can say what you want, but a woman is not a man, nor is a man a woman. A man can't give birth to children no more than a woman can be the head of her household. That's just God's order. That's just God's order. You want to ask me, how does God feel about a woman in the pulpit? Read 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Read that to the end of the chapter and draw your own conclusion about how God feels about it. God is just a God of order. And I'm not willing to go along to get along just for you to feel okay. I'm not willing to do that. Because God is going to hold me accountable. God is going to hold you accountable for your home. God is going to hold you accountable about how you treat your fellow man, how you treat your neighbor, how you love your enemies, how you carry yourself in this world. God is going to hold you accountable for that. And guess what? It will impact your communion with him, your fellowship with him. You cannot ignore and turn your eye to God's will, his commands, and his order, and then expect God to show up on your behalf. And I know oftentimes he still does. I know that. Consider yourself a recipient of grace. But don't put expectations on him. You're out of fellowship with him. You're out of communion with him. Beloved, it matters. Are you traveling in the same path as Christ? The next thing was the motive. What is your motives along this journey? The motive is to glorify the kingdom of God. The motive is to bring all glory unto God. That is the motive. That was Christ's motive. Christ came, Christ suffered, Christ bled, Christ died, Christ rose, Christ ascended, and he did it all for what? For God's glory. He did it all for God's glory. And the thing is I know we got some folk who appear holy, and they observe ceremony, and they observe ritual, and they seem to be morally on par with so much and everything. But the thing is you got folk who are in churches, who are in congregations, and are in leadership positions, and they're doing all of these things to the public and in their eyes, and they're showing that they seem to be just so holy, and they're such Christian folk. But beloved, do you know that a lot of them are doing these things thinking that they are somehow gaining or enhancing their salvation? And see, and that's the problem. As soon as you think that doing these rituals and doing these ceremonies and your morality, as soon as you think that those things will save you, or it's those things that are saving you, that's when you're disconnected from God. That's when you're disconnected from God. I'll give you an example. It's some folk claim to be Christian who believe that you got to be, that water baptism has some power in it, that it actually does something. It's some people who are believers who believe that by partaking of the Lord's table, communion, sacraments, it's some folk that believe that there is some gain of salvation and grace that is administered through observing the Lord's table. And beloved, whenever we do that, whenever we take something and go beyond its purpose, wherefore we do these things, we baptize and we observe the Lord's table. Why? Because Christ said so. That's why we do it. Why did the children of Israel observe Passover? Because God said so. That's why we do it. And as soon as you take it beyond that, as if because if I take the Lord's Supper, then I'm gaining something in regards to my salvation. That's when you're separating yourself from the Lord. That's when you're going down a different path. Your motive must stay the same. I'm doing this to bring glory to my God. And what glorifies him is my obedience unto it. It's the same thing with your tithes. If you bring your tithes unto the storehouse with the expectation that God is going to do something because you gave your tithe, then baby, guess what? Your motive is in the wrong place. We bring our tithes because God said so. That's why we bring our tithes. We give the Lord, we render unto the Lord what belongs to him because God said so. God don't need your money. But out of obedience, there are some blessings, there are some favors, there are some benefits that have your name on it. What is your motives? What is your motives? All these works become works of self-righteousness. All these things that you put so much emphasis and so much energy on in the church because of ceremony and ritual and tradition. Beloved, I come to tell you today, as soon as you look at these things, I don't care. You can worship any way you want to worship. You can adhere to whatever ceremonial rituals you want to adhere to. But as soon as you put emphasis on those things to render you salvation, you've gone too far. You've gone too far. And you're not lining up with the Lord. And when you don't line up with the Lord, you get out of fellowship. You get out of true fellowship. You get out of true communion with Christ. Anything that you do for the Lord, whether it's ceremonial, whether it's ritual, it should be for his glory. It should not go past just honoring him. And then the last thing is your pace. Beloved, the Bible tells us that this race is not given to the swift. Your pace is not measured by how fast you're going. It's not about speed. It's not about speed. But it's about desire and zeal. What we mean here is when you lack desire, when you lack zeal for the Lord, desire to adhere to his commandments, you can get left behind. It does not matter what your resources are. If you lack in resources, what is your desire? The Lord knows your heart. The Lord knows your heart. If your heart is to glorify God, if your heart is to reach one, God will be pleased, and God will not leave you to yourself. Beloved, I leave you with this today. I leave you with this today. Does it matter to you to be in fellowship with God? Or are you more concerned? Or are you more concerned with having the things that you want out of this life? Are you more concerned with appeasing your flesh than being in fellowship with God? It ain't got nothing to do with whether you're saved or unsaved. I'm talking about peace of mind. I'm talking about experiencing heaven right here on earth. Beloved, I'm a child of the King. And even now in this season, I still say the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The Lord is good to me even now. I give him all glory, all honor, all praise even now. I fear nothing even now. Folk are close to us are getting sick. Folk close to us are dying. Yet I will not fear. I will not be afraid. Why? Because my God walks with me. He talks with me. And he tells me that I am his own. He will go through the fiery furnace with me. He will enter into the lion's den with me. And even though I know I get it wrong sometime, and even though I know I mess it up sometime, my motive is to glorify him. My motive is to glorify his name, to advance his kingdom, to advance his purpose, even in my failures. So, beloved, I just ask you today, what is God saying to the church? Church, he's saying, wake up. He's telling us to wake up. He's telling us to get our minds fixed on him. He's telling us. He's sounding the alarm to us. When is the church going to start looking like the church? Forget about being the church, because you can't be something that you don't look like. What are you talking about? I can't be a lion if I look like a dog. I can't be a king if I look like a peasant. So how can the church be the church if we look like heathens? When is the church going to look like the church? Or is the church going to continue to conform to the world? How can we walk with our Christ if we don't agree? God bless you. Beloved, I ask that we keep in prayer the Mosley family. Brother Terry Ross had tested positive for the virus. We want to keep that family lifted. Also, we want to keep lifted up the family of Sister Joyce Smith in her passing this past Sunday evening. Sister Joyce Smith was dear to my heart, and she has succumbed to this virus. Greater Liberty, this hits us close to home. This hits us close to home. So I ask that you continue to pray and lift up that family. I want to remind us this coming Sunday to meet us back online through our media outlets at 12 noon. This is Resurrection Sunday. This is Resurrection Sunday. And even though we may not be able to come together and assemble ourselves together in this place, beloved, we are going to still celebrate our Christ. For if it had not been for the Lord, and all that he accomplished on Calvary, we would still be lost, sinking deep in sin with no end in sight. I love you with the love of Jesus. I pray that you be blessed. I pray that you be encouraged. Check on one another. Check on our elderly and our senior members of not only this church, but of our community. Let us pray for our sick. Let us lean on one another in these times. May God bless you. May God keep you. Amen.